Gora, Mayogat, Las Cancora. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I wanted my first formal comments in this chamber to be in Irish to reflect the shared heritage of the language across all of the traditions in Northern Ireland. I'm also very pleased to be here as a representative of the Alliance Party of Northern Ireland, and indeed being the second member of my party to be elected following the footsteps of my party leader, Naomi Long, who was elected back in 2010, and also to make reference to Stratton Mills, who sat here for about a year as an Alliance member back in the early 70s, a member for North Belfast. Before making comments on the second reading itself, I do want to make reference and pay tribute to my predecessor, Lady Herman. She was a very diligent member over 18 years and conducted herself with tremendous integrity. And in particular, in recent years, she was very dogged in standing up for Northern Ireland, and in particular for protecting the Good Friday Agreement in the context of Brexit. I come to this House as someone who has a very strong mandate for Remain. And indeed, the Remain vote in Northern Ireland grew in the most recent election that brought us here. So Remain is strong and continues to be strong and to reflect the dominant majority of the people in that region. Therefore, I will be voting against this bill in terms of the second reading to honour the wishes of the people who sent me here and the people of Northern Ireland. There is no such thing as a good or sensible Brexit, whether we're talking about the UK or in particular for Northern Ireland. But following on from some of the previous comments, it is worth stressing that the House is potentially poised today to consciously vote to make the UK worse off economically. We are aware that that is what we are doing, and that is an incredible thing, incredible situation that the House finds itself in. The European Union represents perhaps the single greatest example of economic integration anywhere in the world, and we're walking away from that. And there does seem to be this false choice between working in the context of the European Union or the concept of pursuing a global Britain. We can expand our trade and our economy best through working through the European Union, where we have the strength of numbers to stand up and get better deals with the likes of the United States, Australia and China. That is in our self-interests. It is also important to bear in mind that the European Union is more than simply an economic body. It is more than the sum of its parts, and it allows effective and collective responses to global challenges, including migration, global poverty, and, most critically in terms of the current agenda, tackling climate change. In terms of Northern Ireland itself, our society only works based upon sharing and interdependence. Sadly, we continue to be a divided society. We are a complex society with a lot of ambiguities. The Good Friday Agreement balanced all of those different challenges through the unique set of relationships. So it is the principle of consent, but it's more than that. It is the internal dynamics, it's the North-South relationship, and it's also the East-West relationship. In terms of our economy, in terms of both supply chains and trade, we depend both on North-South and East-West linkages. The challenge of Brexit is that if we don't go for a soft Brexit, as defined by the UK staying inside the customs union and the single market, then we are facing a situation where Northern Ireland will be confronted with some form of border, boundary, interface and a degree of friction. And that is a very regrettable situation. Any perception of a border creates the feeling of winners and losers. And in the context of a place like Northern Ireland, where we are inching slowly towards a better, more reconciled and integrated society, that has the potential to be very damaging and indeed destructive. The deal that was negotiated by the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, I think, was a better attempt at a soft landing than the current deal negotiated by the current Prime Minister. Indeed, the previous deal had the pragmatic support of the Northern Ireland business community, an unprecedented level of commitment from them in terms of what can be viewed as a rather contentious political issue. But they understood that it was a genuine attempt to address the issues. The current proposal from the Prime Minister is a much more challenging situation for Northern Ireland. And while it does certainly maintain an open border on the island itself, it does create a much more problematic situation down in the Irish Sea than people had a right to expect and was originally anticipated. To be clear, some degree of checks down the Irish Sea can be managed. Indeed, there are already precedents in that regard, and Northern Ireland has always done things differently since the early 1920s. Nor do I see the notion of any sort of special deal for Northern Ireland or an interface as being a constitutional question. But what has been put down so far is going to be very challenging in terms of our economy, particularly in terms of the East-West interface, but also the West-East exchange as well. Some estimates are putting the compliance costs as high as potentially £300 million per year for our businesses. That simply can't be sustained. So rather than Northern Ireland having a foot in both camps, Northern Ireland risks becoming peripheral. The Prime Minister, throughout the election campaign, has been very clear that there will be no checks down the Irish Sea. That's clearly at odds with the view of most experts and most people who have looked and analysed the deal so far. There are some common grounds across all the parties from Northern Ireland. I'm coming clearly from a Remain perspective. My counterparts in the DUP are coming from a Leave perspective. My colleagues in the SDLP are also coming from a Remain perspective. But together, I think we have a reasonable argument, and we speak with a moral authority about trying to mitigate the impact of that boundary down the Irish Sea. And at the very least, we would ask that the Prime Minister and Government would meet us halfway in that regard. Much has been made of the comment from the Prime Minister about being a one-nation Conservative. Now, unlike my counterparts in the DUP, I don't interpret that comment as meaning one nation for the UK. The UK is about 4 different nations. So my appeal to the Prime Minister is to don't be a one-nation Prime Minister for England, but be a Prime Minister for all 4 nations of the UK, and in particular, as we proceed into more detailed scrutiny of this bill, to pay very particular attention to the needs of Northern Ireland and the damaging implications of what is now set to emerge in terms of that interface down the Irish Sea. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.